Chapter 40. That night they returned home from dining out at a local restaurant that was really just the locals' home redecorated, but the fresh snapper was extraordinary, and Eli had 2 helpings. They'd had some wine, and when she asked if they should get a third glass, he'd shaken his head. He wanted her to remember everything about this night, and he wanted to make sure she was present for what he was about to show her. In the room, she walked to the balcony, her salmon-colored skirt hitting her mid-thigh and her white halter top bringing out her new tan. She glanced to him, realizing he was staring. "Have you seen the stars tonight?" she asked. He nodded. "I have something I want to do." She turned and tilted her chin. "What?" Her voice was tender, and he hoped that when she saw everything he was, she'd remain as comfortable with him as she had become. They weren't just lovers, they were friends. He'd thought about it while they were swimming in the warm, clear water that afternoon, that maybe he didn't miss his packmates because he had found his best friend. "I want to shift for you and introduce the other side of myself, if you think you want to." Her hand floated to her soft, pink lips and she whispered, "Really, Eli? I was wondering if you would, but I didn't want to push." He chuckled. "Really? I wasn't sure if you'd thought about it." She crossed to him and ran her hands down the length of his arms, her touch gentle and very feminine. "I have. I'd love that. What should I do?" On a small smile, he motioned for her to stand back. "Maybe sit on the bed?" "Okay," she whispered, her heart rate picking up as she slipped off her sandals and climbed onto the king size, holding onto the edge with her feet hanging off. She looked small again. He forgot often how tiny she really was, since her personality was so big. And those breasts. Oh man. Focus, Eli. He faced her and held up a hand. "It is going to be a little scary at first. I'm nervous myself, so I can only imagine how you feel." "I'm excited," she grinned. He laughed at that. "Well, let's wait and see what you think afterward. Will you able to hear me?" He blinked, just then understanding how little she knew. "Yeah, I've got complete control. We're one and the same. It's really not like in the horror films. It's just my primal side has a face." She gave a short, expectant nod. He walked to stand in front of her, stripping off the faded blue jeans he'd worn also on the day they arrived. He had on a chocolate brown button-up shirt for the dinner, and he undid each button slowly, holding her eyes. "I've never done this." "Neither have I." She offered him an encouraging smile and kicked her feet. He'd been shifting of his own accord since age 12, and the years had made the motion smooth and not at all painful. He liked to do it, he needed to express both parts of himself, and this was the most raw and honest way. Standing naked before her, he cracked his neck and called his wolf to come out. His bones compacted and reformed quickly, and he dropped to the ground as his body covered itself in a golden brown protective coat of fur. His eyes were as bright as she'd seen them before, only now his nose was a snout and his muzzle was covered not in stubble but in soft short fur, his fangs sharp, and his legs long. He kept his eyes on her as it happened, the bond remaining intact and deepening between them. He felt it just as he had when they first made love. She gasped and grabbed the side of the bed, her knuckles white and her blue eyes wide with shock. He expected to see fear and would have forgiven it, but instead he saw. He couldn't believe it. She stood up when the transformation completed and walked to him with her hand held out. "Eli?" she asked, hesitant. He nodded and patted to her, not sure what she would do. She got on her knees and looked him in the eye. "You're amazing. Your coat is the color your eyes get when you let them glow. It's like warm honey on cinnamon toast." She smiled and ran her hand down his back, feeling his back legs and finally holding his muzzle with both hands. "You can hear me?" He nodded again and licked her nose. She laughed and shook her head in wonder. "Wow. I mean, just wow." He was overcome, never having a human woman touch him when he was in wolf form before. He backed away and rose up to 2 legs, completing the full shift back to man in less than 5 seconds. Still on her knees on the blue tile, she stared up at him aghast. "Does that hurt?" He shook his head, holding out his newly formed hand to help her up even as his nails were still retracting from claws. She took it while watching the final forming of his nails. He wanted to speak but he couldn't. "It's so fast. You can, what do you call it, shift?" He nodded. "You can shift." So quickly it's amazing to watch. Have you ever done that in front of a mirror? He laughed. No. She took his hand and led him to the balcony. Opening the door, she walked out, and he followed her gaze up to the stars. You see those? She asked, pointing upward. He nodded. You're as amazing as those right there. His chest hurt. I know you're sore. I just want to be inside you for a second. She nodded and said, I know. I want it too. I'll go slow, he rasped and pressed into her a little at a time. She arched her ass up for him and stared out at the ocean. There was a single spotlight on it in the distance, up the beach, and they watched the dark waves crashing there against the shore as he ever so slowly worked his way in. He threw his head back as he finally filled her, and held there, reaching around to hold her close to him. She rose up on her tiptoes and wrapped her arms around his, her flesh so soft compared to his. They stayed like that for a long time. Then he carried her inside and curled up with her beside him, falling fast asleep. Chapter 41. On the fifth morning, when they walked down the sandy steps to their cabin, they opened the door to Rose's phone ringing. She ran to catch it, muttering, as she swiped to answer the call, I don't know the number. He leaned against a wall, watching her face change as she listened to the caller. He could hear a woman's crying voice explaining something so fast the words stumbled over one another. Okay, slow down. It's okay. I knew you were going to call, Rose said. Then she covered the phone and whispered to Eli, It's Diana. He snapped to attention and went to stand by Rose so he could hear what was said. Diana was hysterical. I called the police. She's in jail. Eli said I could call you and I don't know what to do. She broke down into sobs as if she'd fallen to the floor. Rose was filled with compassion and patience as she soothed her. Diana, what you did was very brave and you don't have to worry. I can't afford a lawyer. Diana cried. Eli already told me he'd take care of it. Rose looked to him, emotion welling in her eyes. He nodded in encouragement for her to keep going. I will make sure she never hurts you again. She'll come back. She always does, and this time she was so cruel, so brutal. Rose urged her. Diana, go to somewhere safe where you feel loved. Eli mentioned you have a friend nearby. But she's already done so much, Diana whispered. I don't want to be a burden. Rose looked at Eli with her eyebrows raised. Her friend will help, he said, quietly enough that only Rose could hear him. Tell her to go there. She nodded and told Diana, I think she'll be happy to help you. That's what friends are for. And I'm out of town, but I'll come home early. She looked at Eli and he nodded. I'll catch the next flight. We'll press charges together. Okay. Okay, came her quiet reply. Thank you. Thank you, Diana. What you did was very brave. You're very strong, much stronger than you can think. Borrow my faith in you until you believe in yourself. Okay, Diana whispered, but she started crying again. I'm so scared. You don't have to be scared anymore. Eli watched Rose say goodbye after getting the address of where she could find Diana just in case. He strode to the bed at once, feeling impressed with Rose for sacrificing so quickly, and with Diana for doing the thing he didn't know she would. He had to search for his phone, completely forgetting where he'd left it since he hadn't needed to use it. And here I teased you about making sure your phone was charged, he muttered, grateful she hadn't listened to him. I'm so sorry we're going back early, Eli. You don't mind. He spun around and saw the cloud around her face. Stunned, he rushed to her and took her face in his hands. Are you kidding? I'm so glad you didn't hesitate. This is a huge thing she just did, and she's going to need support. Shauna Cove will always be here, Rose smiled. He kissed her. We'll come back. I hope we do. He released her and she went to pack as he checked flights. They were on one by the afternoon, and with the changeover, they were home by nightfall. She called Diana in the cab on the way back from Newark and set up a meeting with her in the morning. He dropped her off at her place so she could look up everything she could find on spousal and partner abuse. I want to arm myself with as much knowledge going in as possible. You understand? Right. Of course, he assured her. She gave him a big kiss before she left, and he made the cab wait until she got inside her building. She turned around and waved goodnight, blowing him a kiss before she vanished inside. She looked back this time, he told the cabbie. What? Nothing. He grinned, sat back and gave him the address for his old flat. Texting Nathaniel he was coming over, he watched New York fly by. Everything looked different. The building still glittered with lights, but he felt like he had changed and would never again be the same wolf again. The second Nathaniel opened the door, Eli locked eyes with him and said, "I'm not getting married, but will you help me buy a ring tomorrow?" Nathaniel's dark eyebrows shot. Chapter 42. A week after they returned, she rolled over in her bed and looked at Eli's sleeping body. His eyes shot open. "What time is it?" He leapt out of bed and ran naked through her house looking for where he'd left his slacks in the kitchen. "What's the rush, Eli?" Rose called after him, leaning on her elbows, having risen up to watch him run. He'd been acting funny for a couple days now, so when he shouted, "I have to go," and appeared in her doorframe already dressed, she wasn't too surprised. "Is this about that new building you guys got commissioned for?" He beamed, buttoning up his shirt, his suit jacket hanging from his arm. He only had one shoe on. "What? Do you know where my other shoe is?" She pointed in the direction of the living room. "You threw it and it slid under the couch during your striptease," which was hilarious. He made a face and cocked an eyebrow. "It was supposed to be sexy." Dryly she said, "Well, then you probably shouldn't have sung Brown Chica, Brown Cow the entire time." He ran for the shoe. "You want me to do it again, that's why you're saying that," he yelled through the walls. "Oh, I definitely want you to do it again." With two shoes on, he reappeared, slipping on his jacket. "I'll see you at the courthouse." She shot up in bed, searching her memory for what day it was. "But the preliminary hearing isn't until next week." "Yeah, but there's that thing." He trailed off, shrugged and vanished. She heard the front door open as he called back. 11 o'clock. "Don't be late." Climbing out of bed, she slid into her slippers and walked naked into the bathroom. Grabbing her toothbrush, she searched her memory for what he was talking about. Diana was now safely in a shelter getting help with the great therapist there, and attending their in-house Al-Anon meetings since it was revealed that Louise had a severe drinking problem. Rose had met with the defending attorney and she felt confident that with evidence they had stacked up the bruising, scars and her recent broken arm that she could get the maximum sentence for Louise, plus a lifelong restraining order. But there was nothing she should be doing today. In fact, she'd secretly hoped that she could spend the day with Eli. A knock at the front door made her grab a robe and head to answer it. She called through. "Who is it?" "Eli," as she tied the robe closed and patted to look through the "It's Michelle." "Open up." "Oh good, you're home." With a knitted brow, she opened the door, and the crease only deepened as she saw Michelle in a very pretty dark blue dress and heels. "It's only 10 o'clock in the morning. On a Thursday. Why are you all dressed up?" Michelle laughed, walking past her into the apartment carrying a plastic bag on a hanger and a tote bag hung on her forearm. "Come with me." "Have you showered?" Rose closed the deadbolt and patted quickly after her friend. "Not yet. Eli just left." "He was?" Michelle whipped around. "He stayed here last night?" "Yeah, he's been here every night. Well, except the first night we flew back. But only because I wouldn't let him. Not that he argued, but You're rambling. Anyway, it can't be fixed now. Come on." Michelle disappeared into her bedroom. Rose stared after her. "What can't be fixed now? What's wrong with him staying over?" When she walked into her bedroom, Michelle was uncovering a very sexy white silk dress that cascaded to the floor. Rose froze and held out her finger. "What is that?" Michelle turned with a smile. "You are definitely not getting married today." Rose's jaw dropped to the floor and she backed to the wall. "I'm not getting married." With the patience one uses when feeding a child foul-tasting vegetables, Michelle slowly advanced on her best friend. "That's right. Breathe. You are definitely not getting married. And you need to put on this dress." She pulled her phone from the tote bag. "Now." Rose rushed to grab the dress, ripping the plastic off of it and holding it up to herself while it was still on the hanger, looking at herself in the mirror. "I don't have time to shower." "It's okay. You'll smell like him and believe me, that's all he wants." "To me? You smell like vanilla." "Really? And a little bit of sex." Rose burst out laughing. "Michelle, I just never want to lie to you again." She laughed too and soon they were dressing Rose after a half hour of hair combing and putting it up then back down putting on only lipstick then rethinking it and doing her whole face, scrubbing her armpits in the bathroom sink, anything she could think of. Rose let Michelle help her into the dress she was definitely not getting married in. Fit her very snugly, but she loved it. Did he buy this? Michelle nodded, zipping up the back and surveying the result in the mirror. Rose looked beautiful as she slipped on the strappy silver heels and turned to see her reflection. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement and her eyes were so bright. Are you sure I shouldn't wear my hair up? I think it. She caught Michelle's gaze in the mirror and pointed at her. Stop crying. Rose shoved down the rush of tears that threatened to explode from her too. Oh my God, Shell. I'm not getting married today. I know. Her heart was so scared yet so full. She didn't know what to do with herself. Where do I go now? What do I do? I'm fucking terrified. Michelle took her hand and grabbed both of their purses. Rose balked. I need my little purse. There's no time. There's time. I can't bring that big brown honker. No. Giving up, Michelle rushed back to the bedroom and Rose followed. Where is it? In the closet. There. There. Rose waved her hands like she was about to fly and Michelle emptied out the old contents and shoved her friend's wallet, phone and lipstick inside the tiny silver purse with the crystal bedazzled straps. Better. Rose exhaled. Yes. And they ran out of there. Chapter 43. Eli stood where Nathaniel had a month ago with his packmates flanking him this time. He made them all wear ties, only his was white to match her dress and his shirt. He stared down the hallway of the courthouse with a big fat grin on his face. You're not nervous? Nathaniel asked. Eli shook his head and reached over and hit Dontae, whose somber face needed a smack. Hell no. I'm not getting married today. What's there to be nervous about? Dark laughed and Nathaniel chuckled. Even Dontae smiled and shook his head. You're truly ridiculous, he muttered. Yeah, but you love me. Here she comes. I'd know that laugh anywhere. He rocked back and forth on his black dress shoes, his tux tugging against the seams. It was so made for his body. He couldn't move too much in it, but he knew she'd fucking love it. Around the corner came Rose and Michelle, with the latter crying. I'm sorry. I'm trying to stop. Rose rolled her eyes and smiled at Eli, rushing to meet him as he stepped forward. I don't know what her problem is. Nothing big is happening. He kissed her nose. Right? Just a normal day for us. She made a face like duh, and glanced to her left as she spotted someone she recognized. Oh, hi Thomas. A pale guy in a suit who had a stick up his ass gave her the once over and frowned, passing them by without a hello. Eli stared after him and she caught the protective look that flashed over his eyes. No, don't mind him. He's just pissed because I always kick his ass in court. She looked around. Well, what now? Go get some food. Nathaniel opened the door to the city clerk's office and motioned for the ladies to go first. After you. Oh, are we going in here again? She asked with innocence. Eli shrugged. Yeah, I thought we'd ask them about the wood paneling. Let's check it out. He took her hand and winked at Dontae, who was staring at them like he was disgraced. He held up the rear of the group, closing the door behind them as Nathaniel headed for the clerk, an older gentleman who didn't recognize the recent groom at first. Oh yes, you're back. He looked at the group. Everyone looks nice. The female witness, county employee nodded agreement, a smile of recognition in her eyes. This is going to sound weird. Eli heard Nathaniel whisper. But these two are going to have the strangest vows you've ever heard. Can you just humor me and act like they're normal? The old guy frowned but nodded. Okay. Great. Nathaniel walked over to Eli and Rose and positioned them in front of each other. Not that this means anything, but would you guys just stand like this? Michelle dropped down to arrange the hem of Rose's gown, muttering, Where is he? Who? Rose asked, looking around. Everybody's here. The door swung open and in ran a teenage delivery guy with a bouquet of white roses. Sorry I'm late. He gave Rose a once-over and handed them to her. These must be yours. Running back out the door, he called back. Sorry. Again. Eli smiled down at his blue-eyed beauty and she held the flowers like she didn't know what to do with them. It made him chuckle and he took them from her and handed them to Michelle as she stepped back to stand by his packmates. He took Rose's hands and jogged his chin to the clerk, whispering to her. He's going to say some things. Just ignore him for the most part. She stifled a laugh and nodded. The clerk knitted his brow up and began. Oh, the normal, we are gathered here today. And does anyone here object to this? Eli shot Dontae a look as his hand went up then. Kidding. Dontae called over with a wink. Eli focused back on Rose, but the clerk grabbed his attention with a loud cough. Did you have your own vows? Eli nodded and met Rose's eyes smiling down at her. The room seemed to blur. Around her, only the two of them mattered now. Rose, he said with feeling. I promise not to stand by you forever until we both die, and never to protect you, and definitely I will not be there when you need me. I will not love you, he held her eyes, or hold you when you have our babies or be there for you when you cry. I promise when you win cases, I will not give a rat's ass. Rose blushed like he just said the most beautiful thing she'd ever heard. Eli, I swear, no, I vow to never remain at your side, never devoted to you. Vow to always fight everything you do. I like it when you do that, he interrupted. She paused and glanced to the clerk. Can I start again? The old guy was flabbergasted. Be my guest. Their friends couldn't help but laugh because the guy's face was so comical. Rose cleared her throat and held Eli's eyes before she took a deep breath. Eli Jackson, I vow to do everything you say, to remain docile and timid, to always be predictable. I promise with all of my heart to not love you and to not have as many babies as you want to fill me with, and I will most assuredly never ever show you how much you mean to me and how happy I am that you came into my life. He kissed her hands and they both looked at the clerk for what was next. He stared, removing his glasses, his eyes flitting back and forth between them. Rose Hendricks, do you not take this man to be your loyal husband, to love and to cherish from this day forward until death do you part? She nodded. I most certainly do not. He paused and turned to Eli. And Eli Jackson, do you not take this woman to be your loyal wife, to love and to cherish from this day forward until death do you part? No way. He put his glasses back on and sighed. I do not pronounce you husband and wife, and you may not kiss the bride. The room went up in applause and Eli and Rose looked over to find other people had come in, hoping to get married after they didn't. Their friends were clapping and whooping and hollering. Dark shouted through cupped hands. Whatever you do, don't kiss her. Eli grabbed Rose and kissed her deeply and with such passion that fresh applause broke out as she went limp in his arms. He picked her up. Glancing back to the man who didn't perform the ceremony, he asked, all the paperwork is intact, right? This is really a done deal, right? The clerk nodded. Both he and the female county employee caught up in the excitement of something old as time done in an entirely new way. Yes, you're really married. Rose tucked herself up against him as he carried her through the 10 or so strangers who'd watched it all. Then he realized what they'd forgotten. Hang on. He stopped before their group went out the doors. What, Eli? She asked as he set her down. Michelle walked up to stand by her, sighed as he looked to his ex-roomie and demanded, give him over. Oh shit. Sorry. Nathaniel searched his pockets and produced 2 rings. Eli dropped to his knees and held up a diamond ring with a slender silver band. Rose's eyes went wide. You like it? She nodded happily. Rose Hendricks, will you go back in time and marry me 10 minutes ago? I will. She looked at him with love and touched his cheek. Except it's Rose Jackson. Yeah. She bit her bottom lip and nodded with a cute smile. Yeah, I want to take your name. Can I have that ring, please? He slid it on and laughed. I meant the other one. Oh, well, let me just take the diamond off you then, he joked, acting like he was trying to remove it. She hit his shoulder pretty hard and said, give me your ring, dummy. He handed it over and rose up to tower over her. She slid it on his finger and looked up. I love you, Eli. He picked her up and whispered for just her. I love you too, Rose. Dark, Chapter 44. The bodega's narrow aisles twisted outside the laws of physics. Like a python swallowing a generous meal, the shelves contracted and expanded. Pasta, bread, bags, cans of soup, all blurred when looked at. The longer Dark stared, the more he couldn't see. His superior strength and speed had left him now. He trudged through air as heavy as salt water. Invisible sound waves, angry, warped voices drifted past him in bursts. He'd never felt this helpless before. Hell, he'd never felt helpless. He had to fight it because he just heard the unmistakable, bone-chilling sound of a safety released. This time, God help him, he had to stop that trigger from being pulled. This time he had to save her life. Without warning, the room whipped by him, changing the scene completely, leaving him standing at the front of the store where two masked thugs had guns, shifting back and forth between the Asian employee behind the counter and customers who blurred out of focus. Dark searched to see who was in danger, who was terrified, who needed his help. A shower of loud cracks shattered the air as a powerful explosion lunged from the barrels of two 9mm. Shouting, Dark leapt to push the humans to safety, but failed. He sat upright, bursting awake, covered in sweat in his king-size bed, gripping the navy blue comforter around his naked waist as he struggled to breathe. I didn't get there in time. Again, an involuntary shiver lit through him. It had felt real. Welcome rays of daylight and reality peeked through dark blue sheaths as his bedroom curtains came into focus. He scanned the familiar clutter that lay on the black dresser and armoire by the door, as well as on the nightstand to his right. His eyes fell to the stack of books lying there. To root himself, he read the titles. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Running with Scissors, and Corrections. Underneath them lay books Do Furnish a Room, photographs of home libraries he loved to look at to inspire his design creativity. He was an architect after all, even if he was a werewolf. Throwing off the blankets, Dark walked naked to the bathroom, his long limbs heavy. His ginger-colored hair and beard showed the usual signs of sleep, twisting this way and that. He paid them no mind. It was his dark blue eyes that grabbed his attention. They had the same stricken, sorrowful look someone has when they see a loved one die. What the fuck? Staring at his reflection, he turned on the faucet, wishing he knew why this particular dream grabbed him and didn't ever want to let go. It was sure to pollute the rest of his day. Just what I need. Capturing water in large, cupped hands, he splashed his face repeatedly. At least this time I saw the guns before they fired, before she was lifeless on the floor. It's an improvement, he said aloud, trying to talk himself into believing. Grabbing a black hand towel, he scrubbed his face and trudged back to the bedroom to scoop his phone off the dresser. It was 11:11 a.m. The matching numbers gave him pause. They seemed like they were telling him to pay attention. He tossed the towel onto the bed, cracking the long, thick fingers of his right hand. He dialed Eli with his left. His friend and packmate answered quickly. Yo. I had it again. Pause on the other end of the line. The dream. No dream. A bone-crushing nightmare. I missed my alarm. If I hadn't missed it, maybe I wouldn't be stuck with this fucking feeling. A smile could be heard in Eli's tone. Nothing unusual there. Come to the office. We're all here to kiss you and make it better. So like Eli to be able to break through the haze and make him smile. That's why Dark had chosen him to call of his 3 packmates. If you're lucky, we'll even hold you and tell you it's gonna be all right. Dontae first. I bet he can't wait. He's hugging himself right now to practice. Dontae bellowed from the background. I'm doing no such thing. Eli mock whispered. He is. It's embarrassing. Whispering was ridiculous in and of itself. With their supernaturally enhanced hearing, all of them could hear a cockroach running 2 rooms over if they wanted to. Not that they'd want to, because who would? Cockroaches are foul. Nathaniel, the 4th and final member, called out. Get in here. We've got meeting today. Shit. Dark threw open the doors to his armoire, scanning his suits. I completely forgot. He grabbed a charcoal gray Armani. Eli reminded him. You didn't forget. You just missed the alarm 'cause you were in hell. Don't worry about it. We'll cover for you if they get here first. He scanned 3 hangers of ties, all complementing his Scottish coloring. What time are they coming? Noon. I can make it. He grabbed a pale blue tie that wasn't too thick. You've got coffee. Does a pig poop? Dark laughed and hung up. He dropped the phone next to the hand towel and muttered in a much better mood. Fucking Eli. As he got dressed, he thought about how he was one lucky son of a bitch to have friends like he had. They had his back always. Even when they fought, there was respect behind it. Now that 2 of the 4 wolves were hitched to not-so-bad-looking ball and chains, the pack was stronger than it ever had been. The human females who'd taken Eli and Nathaniel by surprise, had unexpectedly improved the group as a whole. Not that Dontae would ever admit that. Eli and Nate weren't as moody as werewolves tend to be anymore. That improved the balance in the pack. Calmed them all, which was something. A man and a wolf sharing space in one soul can be one hell of a roller coaster ride. Nathaniel went down first, then Eli a month later, even though he'd made a pact with Dark to stay single, the fucking traitor. That was 5 months ago. Which seemed like a lot longer to Dark because ever since, his own desire to find his forever mate had grown increasingly unignorable. It was all he could do not to think about it and not to be jealous when he saw his packmate so happy. She was nowhere to be found. He'd even put himself on one of those dating sites. He'd met a lot of pretty and interesting women, but there's a spark that ignites a man's wolf when he finds the one. It can't be denied. It's annoying as fuck because you can't delude yourself with anything less than what your wolf wants, true love. One night he'd made the mistake of confiding in his packmates that he was trying to find her. The happily married ones could understand, but Dontae thought the effort ridiculous. Listening to Dontae gripe about women isn't a fun way to spend an evening in New York City. Why do you need a woman when all they cause is pain? Fucking Catherine, that bitch. Ignoring Dontae's jaded question, Eli said, "We weren't looking for it like you are, Dark." "Yeah, but Dark's always been different," smiled Nathaniel. Dark's wolf snarled inside him. "What the fuck is that supposed to mean?" With a calm stare, Eli clocked him. "You know what it means. That you're a hopeless romantic." He wasn't talking about the other thing. Nathaniel's green eyes flickered, alight with the wolf's fire tumbling just below the surface. "You know I'd never consider your uniqueness anything but extraordinary." Nate waited for Dark's heartbeat to return to normal. "That's better. Now about the women, we didn't want what we found. You do, which might make it harder to find," Dontae growled. "So stop looking." Subject: Chapter 45. My uniqueness. Dark wasn't like the other 3 werewolves in his pack. He was in the extremely rare 9% who scared most wolfborn because they didn't understand beasts like him, couldn't grasp in their minds or hearts how a mere human being could change without wolf blood coursing through his DNA. How something could shift him just because of who he was, what he was made of, and what had happened to him, something so awful that the impact could ignite his soul spark into an explosion that would change his life forever. For all to see and some to hate, the evidence that he was different was always on his face. Wolves can't have blue eyes. Look it up. If you see a wolf whose eyes are pale ice blue or Dark's color deep sapphire, or something in between, then that beast is either mixed with something else or, in Dark's case, not mixed at all. Something far more miraculous. He was born at the unusual age of 13. Dark Grayson was the #1 rebel in his school. His biggest hobby was mouthing off to his teacher on his way out of the classroom as it was in full swing. He chased the curviest girls, skipped class, caused problems wherever he went. Irreverence for the system was his way of life. He'd go find a tree in the woods outside the school's borders, climb up and sit on its thick branches for hours. Just sit there. There were plenty of places to get lost in New Hampshire, but he liked a certain grove the best. Felt the most apart from society, the most rural. His parents would search, always shocked he'd be in the same place. "If you want to be lost, why always hide here?" "I'm not hiding. I'm thinking." They'd be furious. They'd ground him. He'd swear under his breath that they couldn't hold his soul prisoner. "It's free. You don't fucking own it." His mother would slap his face and shout in Gaelic, "Watch your mouth, Dark." Scottish women can throw one hell of a hit, and Amy Grayson was no exception. The pain made him feel alive. Philip Grayson never hit him. He loved his son but did not understand him. A talented architect, he too was of a thick Scottish line and also had red hair. But the angry Viking gene had skipped his generation entirely, instead concentrating wholly on his son. It made him glad he and his wife didn't have a second child. Teenage Dark spent many solitary nights in his room fighting his own demons, his headphones blasting music so loudly it might have split his brain right down the middle had he not been destined for more. More life, more speed, more passion. His parents could barely tolerate him. "It's normal pubescent behavior," the psychologist said, but fearing it was much more, his mother watched him like a hawk. Finally one day he was eating a bowl of cereal and caught her staring at him through narrowed blue eyes. I'm not going on a shooting spree, Mom. Stop watching me. They say it's the introverts who. Ma, look at me. He leaned in close, his young eyes wide and for once free of sarcasm. I don't hate people. I don't have some wild fantasy they hate me. I seek no vengeance against humanity. I've got a strong moral compass. Oh, her eyebrows flew up. Then why do you keep mouthing off to Mrs. Lariman and walking out of class? Because she shouldn't be teaching. That pulled a long sigh from his mother. Dark stared at her a moment before adding, I just don't fit in. Feel. He picked up the spoon again. I can't explain it. With her little hand she hit the table hard. Try. Scooping up a large helping of Lucky Charms, he searched his mind for an answer. He muttered on a shrug. Wild. She'd thrown up both her hands. I can only blame myself. I married a man. Unlike my father, but had one just like him. The bastard. Hey. Dark dropped the spoon. Milk splashed unnoticed from his bowl. He laid his hand on the table, stretching out his arm, bridging the distance between his two parents. He most identified with his mother's passionate temperament, but he would not stand being compared to his grandfather who, when alive, was a real devil of a man. I'm not like him. I'm different. I would never hit a woman. Ever. You hear me? Don't say that about me again. We are not alike. Not sold. She slammed her hands on the table and used them to push up from the chair. Muttering a bunch of crap he didn't want to hear, she shook her head. All the way out of the room. Things only got worse. His relationship with his parents was strained further. And after a series of school incidents, Dark was suspended. The night Dark came home and the school called with the news, his father hung up the phone. Great. It had to be today. He headed for the stairs of their 3-bedroom home. The third room had been meant for a sister that Dark never got. Now it served as his mother's office, where she tried to pen sci-fi books never good enough to publish but that kept her entertained. As he passed the door, Philip called in. Amy, what are we going to do about the benefit? I can't bring the boy and proudly call him my son tonight. As his father threw down a look, Dark scowled up at him from the first floor. His mother appeared in the doorway, blue eyes exploding with frustration and disappointment. Of course he's not coming. He's going to stay here and think about what he's done. As if that's any form of punishment. The boy never leaves his damn room. Philip disappeared into their bedroom to change. Amy walked to the railing and looked over it, ginger-colored shoulder length, hair falling forward. I'm hoping the punishment of us not wanting to be seen with you in public is enough. Her awful words sliced right through his heart. Fuck you guys. What did you say to me? Amy shouted. She sprinted down the steps. Dark stood his ground. You heard me, Mom. The sting of her fingers left a red mark on his skin. He smirked. That all you got? You little. Slap. 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 He grabbed her wrists and held them as Philip appeared outside their bedroom door and shouted, Let her go now. Dark dropped her wrists and backed away. I wasn't going to hurt her. His mom, looking defeated, threw over her shoulder. He was just stopping me from hurting him. Dark chuckled sardonically. As if you could. What are you, 5 feet 2 inches? As she ran at Dark, Philip shouted from upstairs. Amy, that's enough. Dark quickly ducked out of the way. Gravity pulled her to the floor. Feeling guilty, Dark went to help her up, but embarrassed, she pushed him away. I'm all right. Leave me alone. Even though there wasn't a speck of dirt on the tile floor of their foyer, she dusted herself off and smoothed down her hair. I'm fine. She locked eyes with him. You'll stay here and we'll go out and have a wonderful night with delicious food in one of the most beautiful event halls in the city. One day, Dark, you will want these kinds of luxuries, and you will regret being such a little demon that we couldn't share times like these together with you. Mark my words. She headed for the stairs, glancing up to Philip. She repeated, this time in a mumble, Mark my words. Dark stayed in the kitchen until 45 minutes later. He heard 2 sets of footsteps coming down the stairs. He walked to the door and leaned on its frame. His eyebrows lifted. They may as well have been dining with the President of the United States for how good they looked. His father's well-tailored suit bent at the elbow as the keys were lifted from the bowl by the Door. His mother's coat was slipped off the coat rack and onto her petite shoulders. She wouldn't look at Dark, but Philip glanced over. Guilt and regret tugged at him. Her words echoed in his ears. They looked so elegant it made him feel like a child standing there in torn-up jeans and a ragged death metal t-shirt. Part of him wanted to go with them, though he hated to admit it. He stared at the ground, shoving his hands into his pockets, the top of his boxers showing above his belt line, with a bare toe. He picked at the base of the doorframe and with peripheral vision watched as the door opened as they stepped outside. The door shut behind them and Dark walked over to lock it, but his hand shook as he went for the deadbolt. He swung it open. "I'm sorry." They turned in surprise, already halfway to their spotless white Range Rover. His mom's eyes softened. Her head tilted a little. He could see the stubbornness leave her like magic. "Me too," she said. As his heart pounded in his ears, Dark offered, "Have fun." A slip of regret flashed over Philip's face. "Be good." Dark couldn't help but smirk. "Never." Both parents chuckled, happy for a moment of lightness. Philip opened the car door for Amy. She used the sureness of his strong hand to get in. He closed the door and walked around, his eyes on his son. "Try not to burn the house down." Dark called over with a devilish smile. "Why you gotta take the fun outta everything?" Philip grinned. "Night, son." "Night, Dad." He watched their car leave the long driveway, the red lights growing smaller and smaller until they disappeared. Just after midnight there was a knock on the door. Dark clambered down the steps calling out, "You guys lose your keys or something, what the hell?" His 13-year-old hand unlocked the deadbolt in a flash. He swung the door open without thinking and froze in confusion at the sight of two uniformed police officers gravely staring back at him from the front porch. "Dark Grayson?" asked one. "Yeah." He frowned, his pulse quickening as he glanced from one displayed badge to the other. "There's been an accident. Your parents were attending a charity event. There was an attack on the facility. A bomb." "What?" Dark threw his hand up to stop the policeman. "Wait, what?" It was as if the man had spoken from a parallel universe, one where horrible things happen that you can never undo. The sight of tears jumping to the teenage boy's eyes gave the officer pause. He glanced to the ground. "I'm sorry. Your parents were among 23 people who were killed in the attack. They and the others were seated nearest the podium where it detonated." Dark stared into the distance. He refused to let the tears fall because that meant he accepted what they were telling him. "They can't be dead." With gentleness the second officer offered, "Son, it might ease your mind to know that, with this type of explosion, they never knew what hit them." His parents' faces leapt into his mind. "Stop." The first officer's lips were a thin, grim line. "Do you have someone to call? Family? We can take you to them, or..." When he didn't answer, the second officer asked, "Son. Son." The word slammed into his stomach, knocking the wind out of him. An itching feeling lit up the outer layer of his skin from his toes to the top of his head. "Son. My grandmother's visiting. She's upstairs." He quickly lied, feeling suddenly as if the world was spinning in a circle at an ever-increasing speed. There was no grandmother upstairs. She was back in Scotland, and since she'd never stood up for either of them against her abusive father, his mother barely talked to the woman. His paternal grandparents, heavy smokers since childhood, had both passed from cancer by the time Dark was 9. There was nobody. He had nobody. "Oh God, I'm going to have to tell her." He trailed off. Offering their apologies again, the officers headed to their car. The itchiness of his skin increased as Dark closed the door. He felt a yank at something inside of him, like all of his organs were making themselves known. He cracked his neck and locked the deadbolt, a harmonizing clicking sound of metal and bone. To his dying day he would believe the police not arguing with him, or asking to meet his invisible grandma, was an act of God, one that saved them from being killed, because as the lock turned in the door, Dark felt the change begin. His dermis inflamed. Hot tears released onto his cheeks. He struggled to get to the stairs, grasping onto the railing as his lungs gave way. He saw the grand hall his parents had been in, could picture the extravagant decor, the well-dressed people sitting around white tablecloths, the explosion igniting the podium and spreading out. He could see the wine glasses in front of half-empty plates, His parents' smiling faces as they vanished forever. I'm sorry. Images of Philip helping Amy into the car. Red taillights fading. I'm sorry. Dark dropped to the floor as his bones compacted and reshaped, the pain matching that in his soul. I'm sorry. Auburn-colored fur exploded from every pore. His eyesight sharpened instantly, the foyer crackling into focus. I'm sorry. He screamed out as his jaw snapped and changed, stretching outward to a muzzle with sharp fangs he could not understand. I'm so sorry. The refrigerator hummed as loudly as the engine of an 18-wheeler, beating past his ears. Rats scurried in the attic upstairs, little nails muffled but yet inexplicably audible. He turned to the mirror lining the south wall and saw a wolf staring back, larger than any he'd seen along the roads in wintertime. Blue eyes much lighter than his blinked back at him and began to glow as tears slipped down the short fur that lined his new face. As he stared at this unfamiliar beast, barely understanding it was him, Dark's heartbeat became all that he could hear. The pain was unbearable, the sight unbelievable. He crashed through a first-floor window and ran. For 3 nights he did not stop running save for when exhaustion forced him. During those brief, impatient stints he'd hobble around, for legs shaky, before the pain in his heart drove them onward. He didn't eat. He didn't drink water. He just ran. Dark, the boy, had no idea where he was going, but his wolf knew. It led him until finally it stopped in a forest in the northern east point of Maine. There it withdrew into his soul and he reformed into his teenage human form, crumpling to the ground to sleep on raw earth. From far off he heard voices. They seemed to be talking about him, but they tumbled onto one another, dizziness and lack of nutrition fogging his mind. Naked, starving, weak and shivering, Dark cracked open tired eyes and saw 15-year-old blonde boy kneeling by his side. He was naked too, but seemed unfazed by that, even unconscious of it. There were others behind him, naked males and females who stared at him like they couldn't believe their eyes. The blonde boy frowned. I'm Dontae, who are you? The memory of his parents' death flew back to him. My family, he choked. They're gone. They weren't wolves, a female whispered. Look at his blue eyes. But he's one of us, a male quickly countered. You saw him. Smell him. The boy named Dontae held up his hand. We've heard of this happening. So, Dark, he asked again. Who are you? What's your name? He felt the cold earth under his palms as he supported himself, sitting up. Dark, Grayson. Dontae nodded. How long have you been a wolf? A wolf, Dark whispered, staring at the boy in confusion. Then he remembered. The beast, he could sense it now waiting inside of him. Inextricably linked. I don't know what you're talking about, he lied. Some whispering and a couple chuckles came from the group. Dontae's blonde eyebrows knit together. Nathaniel? A little help. A teenager with dark brown, wavy hair, sinewy muscles and bright green eyes stepped forward. It must have just happened. He looked stunned. He's starving, said a flaxen-haired female in her 20s. At the sound of her voice, Dark glanced over and paused at the sight of her naked breasts, the curve of her hips. Her legs were spaced hip-width apart and her bush, the color of straw, was full. She smiled at his slack-jawed gaze. Starving but not dead. He didn't have the energy to blush. Who are you people? A female in her late 30s stepped forward, with long dark hair covering one of her dusky nipples as she knelt on one knee. She inspected his blue eyes, like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. I'm Luna. She reached over and slid a finger along his wet cheek, cupping under his chin. Her touch was motherly and welcome. You don't know what you are, do you? He shook his head. You are special, Dark. That's what you are. And with finality, 15-year-old Dontae added, and you have a new family. Now, Chapter 46. With wrinkled hands pulling at her fore, Doris snapped. It feels like it's racing. I don't care what that contraption says. Talia Irizarry smiled and poked at the screen with a long red fingernail. This is one pricey contraption, and if you get scared, all you've got to do is look at this pulsing red line to make sure you're okay. It'll go gangbusters. If you're not, the 85-year-old shouted, or flatten right out. It had been a long night, but patients like Doris had the opposite effect on Talia as they had on some of the other nurses. They charmed her. Whenever they lost their sense of logic, like right now, she softened. The same couldn't be said of Janet, but Janet was a bitch. Everyone knew that. tucking in the blanket so that Doris felt as close to swaddled as a grown-up. Good, Talia whispered. Now get some sleep, Mrs. Williams. Doris grumbled and burrowed deeper into the covers. In the cold fluorescent lighting she looked extremely fragile. Talia gave the old woman's foot a squeeze through the covers. I'll come check on you in a bit. I've got my buzzer. Oh, I know, Talia smiled. She turned off the light and left the room. The corridor was bright, as though it were noon rather than midnight. All the other rooms were dark save one. Janet stepped out and walked to the nurse's station, her dark hair in a bun, hands loosely gripping a urine sample. Talia headed to the room and flicked off the light, joining Janet a moment later. Just as she placed the sample into a metal bin destined for the lab. The light, Janet. Turn off the light so they can sleep. Come on. Janet shot her a disdainful look. Why, when I know you will? A corner of her mouth turned up. You're such an asshole, Talia spat, walking behind the large beige counter. She picked up the half-eaten salad she'd left behind when Doris buzzed her, and plopped down in a chair to finish it. That rabbit food is not going to help, Janet said with a snide look over her shoulder as she headed away like the coward she was. Jonas, Talia's best friend and co-worker, rolled his eyes from where he sat, about 5 feet down the long nurse's station. He leaned toward Talia with his right hand still filling out the form on which they were required to write a patient's nightly progress. She's just upset they couldn't cast a woman as Hannibal Lecter. I heard that, faggot, Janet called back. Neither Talia nor Jonas flinched at the nasty word. It was Janet's favorite thing to call the Filipino 25-year-old, mostly because she was evil, but also because after he'd first started at Manhattan General Hospital, she'd made a pass at him. He'd said if she had a cock he would consider it because he was indeed very, very gay. The idea of being with a woman appalled him the same way being with a man appalls some men. And being with Janet? Oh me fucking no way in hell it never gonna happen. Not a typo. You going out this weekend? Talia asked. He tossed the pen onto the counter and spun around with a flourish. Does Janet need to get laid? Talia grinned. Where? The usual places. Why, you wanna come? Shoving a forkful of kale and organic cranberries into her mouth, Talia gave a weak shrug. Meh. You won't meet a guy there, I can tell you that. I will meet 50. But you? Not so much, honey. Chewing the bitter leafy green was perfectly apropos to eating the bitter truth he just served up. She waited to swallow before saying, yeah, but it's not like a nurse is going to meet Mr. Spectacular in New York City. The men here are looking for gorgeous models and actresses, of which there are thousands. Jonas cocked his head. You mean hookers and waitresses? Talia smiled. God, I love you. But yeah, apparently that's what they want. She rested an elbow on the counter and shoveled another hefty bite of salad into her mouth. Michu, she muttered. Okay, I want to come. I need to get out of the house and I need to dance. Walking paperwork to its proper folder, Jonas waved a dramatic hand. Fuck. Yes, girl. I love dancing with you. When Friday night came, Talia's 4-inch heels clicked up the subway cement stairs, dirt and grime of the popular city making her avoid the handrail. She'd seen enough illnesses to be very careful of what she touched. Ample hips swayed and she held her clutch purse under her arm so she could tug at the crawling hem of her red dress. Damn it. Her shiny dark brown hair bounced in long wavy curls, blocking her view as she arrived on the sidewalk. An unexpected and violent slam into her body took her completely off guard. Her purse was ripped from underneath her elbow. She spun around to see a teenage boy racing off, glancing over his shoulder only once. Hey, come back. She tried to run, but the heels made that impossible. And hilarious. Shit, she muttered, then yelled. Someone get that kid. He's got my purse. A half a block up, a blond man in a perfectly tailored suit appeared like a flash from the entrance of a restaurant. He grabbed the boy, plucked the purse away from skinny hands and pushed him, as though the effort caused him no strain whatsoever. The kid ran off in fear of being arrested, stumbling from the push and darting a quick glance back to see if the man followed him. Talia gaped at her luck. Thank you. The man watched the teenager run for a few moments, and then turned to Talia with the mildest raise of a blonde eyebrow as he walked to her. This yours? He smiled, handing it to her. She nodded, glancing from him to the running boy. Thank you so much. Canceling credit cards I can handle, but I thought I'd have to go to the DMV and get a new license. You just saved me from a certain kind of hell. Thank you so much. That was amazing. No problem. He raked an appreciative glance down her and added with a voice so deep it seemed unnatural, nice dress. With that, he flipped on his heel and headed away. She stared at his backside. The lines of his shoulders, waist and ass in that expensively tailored suit were something else, and he just helped her out and expected nothing in return. She sighed, thinking, now there goes a real man. She planned on telling Jonas the second she saw him, but when she walked into Pieces, the place she thought was going to be a club, her spirits sunk immediately at the sight of it. This was no club. It was a kitschy dive bar. And she was way overdressed. There were a couple of dudes mud wrestling in their underwear, shitloads of tinsel hanging from the ceiling, and disco balls for fun, not dancing. Karaoke table, tent cards, and a drag queen singing I Will Survive at the top of her lungs. She was killing it, but still. Talia pulled out her phone from her rescued clutch and began to text an apology to Jonas, telling him she couldn't make it, until she heard him live and in person, coming right at her with his finger wagging. Talia, you sexy bitch. Don't you dare bail on me. Look at this dress. Trouble. Bald and built David rolled up behind Jonas with extremely tall and extremely black Andre. They both echoed Jonas's appreciation, though David did it with just a strong affirmative nod. Talia grinned at them and rolled her eyes. Okay, I need a drink. As they all headed for the bar, Andre shouted the lyrics of the LMFAO song. Shots, 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 shots. Talia awoke the next morning on the tiny living room floor of Jonas's one-bedroom apartment in Midtown with a blanket over her body, her shoes splayed out to her right and a bucket on the left. She peeked inside and found it thankfully empty. Remind me never to do that again. From the bedroom came Jonas's pained and groggy voice. Sleeping Beauty? Pretty sure I look more like the evil queen. Get me some water. If I could get up. Slut. Pause. Did you have fun? I danced my ass off, so yeah, but as of this headache I officially hate Andre. Chuckling came from the bedroom. Talia closed her eyes, letting blessed sleep take her away for at least a couple more healing hours. Chapter 47. Late again the following Monday morning, Dark leapt from the taxi and headed for the offices of the architecture firm he and his packmates owned. He smiled as he admired the sign above their gorgeous two-story downtown Manhattan building. The Inc. Dontae, Dark, Eli, Nathaniel. It was just a funny coincidence to them that it kinda spelled out Din. The long silver door handle glinted despite the overcast sky. Dark wiped his hand on his pants before touching it, out of respect. Inside he passed the eternally unoccupied receptionist desk. Less people, less curiosity, and unlocked double doors leading to a sparkling white hallway with 5 closed doors, one for each wolf's private office, plus one for the stairs located at the far end. Bypassing his office first door on the right, he headed to the second door on the left. From within came the deep voices of his packmates and partners, as audible as if no walls existed between them. A werewolf's hearing is beyond exceptional, and he did not need to say, I'm here. But he said it anyway. No shit. Eli smirked as Dark strode in. From where he leaned against the wall, Nathaniel smiled. Next to him on the wooden wall hung a 5 feet tall black and white framed photograph of a building they designed. Another one like it adorned the wall opposite with a different skyscraper they created. Nathaniel wore a black suit, which made his emerald green eyes all the more striking. Not that Dark noticed or cared. And since this was his office, like the king he thought himself to be, Dontae sat back in an immense leather chair behind his enormous black desk, with violet curtains pulled back to expose a not-so-attractive view of another building. New York first-floor views often suck, although it did allow diffused light to enter the room and give his body a halo effect, probably on purpose. His blonde hair was freshly trimmed and his tailored suit dark blue. Hazel eyes landed on Dark as though he were in the middle of a thought. Good. You're here. Eli slouched in a chair opposite Dontae with his back to the door, a dark brown suit expertly paired with a lavender button-up shirt and dark purple tie. Of all of them, Eli was the most creative with his wardrobe, and it always worked for him, especially since he was the bulliest of the bunch. The contrast of his intimidating presence to his straight-from-the-magazine style was impactful. They're running 10 minutes late. What? Why didn't you text me so I could stop stressing out? Dontae set down the pen he'd been holding. Because this is the third meeting. You've been late 2 in 2 weeks and I didn't want to chance you pulling that shit again. Oh, fuck you all, Dark laughed. Nathaniel asked, have the dream again? No, thank God. Okay, let's go. Dontae rose from his desk, and together they headed out of the office toward the stairs. Eli asked, whose turn is it to open the door when they get here? I don't remember, Nathaniel muttered, which meant only one thing. It's yours, Dontae dryly informed him. I know, Nathaniel sighed. But let's talk about the game plan. First. A sound brought them to an abrupt halt, Dontae's hand on the staircase door handle. They cocked their ears. Eli rubbed the short shave on his head. They're here. Dark shrugged. This isn't our first hunt. Go get him. Nathaniel left for the reception area muttering, I hate having to explain why we don't have a receptionist. The others grinned and Dontae led the way up the stairs. He opened the door, revealing a single conference room that took up the entire second story. The walls that spanned the length of the room were floor-to-ceiling windows. On the farthest end was a projection screen cut into a pale gray frame. Centered in the room was an enormous table surrounded by comfortable high-backed, black chairs. Warm recessed lighting lit the space, achieved by laying yellow glass over energy-efficient bulbs. Dark walked to the refrigerator with a glass door, all contents viewable like you'd see in a convenience store. Inside were cold-pressed juices, white wine, and bottled water. All the chemicals in soda don't mix well with the wolves' primal DNA, so they didn't stock the stuff. White or red? He waved a hand between the fridge and wine cabinet beside it. A modern glass-fronted armoire stocked with very expensive bottles of red Zinfandel, Pinot Noir, Sangiovese, and Cabernet. As each took a chair, Eli and Dontae answered in unison. Both. In no time, Dark had 4 bottles set on the table beside elegant long stemmed glasses. The door opened and in walked a disappointing group, not one woman among them. For men in lackluster suits filed in and shook hands with Dark, then Eli, then Dontae. As Nathaniel shut the door, smiled and asked with confidence, shall we begin? Dark walked to the projector screen and faced his audience. Dontae pointed to the 3D glasses sitting in front of each chair. Gentlemen, you'll need these. The men mumbled surprise and put them on. The oldest one was in his 70s and had not seen a 3D movie before. He muttered something about looking ridiculous, a statement everyone ignored. From his seat, Eli hit a shiny silver button on the panel embedded in the table before him, causing the lights to dim and the blinds to shut out the overcast sky. Nathaniel typed into a tablet and seconds later a virtual 3D model of a 15-story building appeared. Turned slowly around, giving them every angle, every nook. The men were quiet, impressed with the hologram like display. Ever the performer, Dark explained. These panels you see on the sides atop floors 13 through 18 aren't cosmetic. They're solar panels. A younger suit with prescription glasses underneath the 3D ones grumbled, you can't have a 13th floor. It's bad luck. The werewolves tried very hard not to throttle the superstitious numbnut. They held their tongues, a flicker of tension in their necks betraying them. But the humans didn't notice, since the 3D rooftop with walking, exercise path, and patio seating currently had them wrapped. Dontae smiled. We'll go from 12 to 14, of course. That was a slip of the tongue. Dark returned to the more important subject. These panels not only look sleek and unlike anything you've seen before, they're designed to trap and store the sun's energy for longer periods of time, even pulling from the UV rays through heavy cloud cover. Nathaniel's voice rose and the men turned in their chairs to look at him. Even if we've had weeks of rain, these panels will be working hard to keep your business up and running when others have fallen dark. With sunny days, you'll gain about 10 days of backup electricity with cloud cover 4 or 5. But it's more than they'll have. Your other clients will have the same technology, the suit with double glasses said. Dontae nodded once. And the city will be better for it. The humans turned back to Dark. He stepped in front of the image. It danced on his body and face as he continued. As with all of our designs, we use recycled materials, energy-saving lights with warm covers that set a comfortable tone, like the ones you see above you in our ceiling. They all looked up, and Eli hit a dimmer switch to make the lights brighten and fade. Again, Dark directed them back to the rotating image. Because we want to show as much respect to our planet and Mother Nature as we can, we use stone, wood and other materials the earth gives us with restraint and respect. Our paints are bio-safe, with natural dyes and ingredients. It does sound expensive, the brown-haired man admitted as he tapped on the table with the side of his thumb. Dontae explained. Companies who leave a smaller footprint are helped in their endeavors. The 70-year-old leaned back and ungracefully removed his 3D glasses. The projector was turned off. Wine was poured. Dark sat down and joined them, while the unspoken question of whether or not this was a go or not floated around their heads. The dark-haired man asked, "How long would it take you to tear down the existing building were we to move forward?" With a glass of Old Ghost Lodi Zinfandel in hand, Nathaniel answered, "Our guys will have it cleared away safely within a week of our start date, which will be after we get the okay from the city. That will take some time." He used the word will instead of could to sway them into feeling the deal was already in motion, a sales technique they'd all read about. In appreciation of the wine, the young suit with glasses smacked his lips. "Well, why wait? Tell the courts we're sorry later." Eli leaned in with a wink. "My wife's a lawyer. Trust me, you don't want to do anything you have to apologize for." Loud chuckles and knowing nods from all around. Dante's deep vibrato quieted the room. "So, gentlemen?" The humans exchanged silent conversations through weighted glances. "We need to discuss it further on our own." Dark started chuckling. Everyone turned to see what was so funny. He raised an eyebrow. "No, you really don't." Wine glasses froze midair. The 70-year-old pursed already thin lips. "And why is that?" Dark ignored the looks of his packmates as he walked to pull another bottle of red from the elegant cabinet. As he ambled over, he explained, "Because we don't need this job as much as you need us. When it comes to green design, we're the top in our field with connections the other firms simply don't have. Our reputation is excellent, and from what I hear, you need a boost in ratings from your stockholders." He corked a bottle and let it make as loud a pop as wine can make. "Or am I wrong?" Eli coughed and looked at Dontae to say something, but it was Nathaniel whose smooth voice rose to calm the room because Dontae had an irrepressibly amused smile on his lips. "Dark has pointed to the elephant in the room and called it out. And he's right, although his manner is rather flippant considering all you've been going through in the press." Nate held the elder man's eyes. "The publicity alone is worth our cost. You'll be able to shout to the world that you helped improve our environment." Dante's tone implied the scandal was ridiculous. "You'd think a hooker cocaine divorce scandal wouldn't get more than a line on page 5 in modern days like ours, but the public still loves a bloodbath, don't they?" Dark poured himself a fresh glass. "A clean slate is what you came here for, isn't it? While we know you really do care about the world," Eli smiled, "going green will also be beautifully distracting icing on an already much-eaten cake." The 70-year-old regarded the architects with a keen eye. He picked up the glass he'd set down when Dark had begun to insult him, and took a slow sip. He made the room wait several suspenseful moments before announcing with a calm that showed how many years he'd dealt with both life and business, "We're in." Glasses were raised immediately. The job would take a couple of years to complete, and over that time they'd have a lot of time to argue. Now was the time to toast and to drink. Dark leaned back and smiled. "If only my father could see me now." Chapter 48. The buzzer from room 321 had been quiet for a long time. Too long. With her eyes on the room, Talia rose from the desk and headed to check on Doris. "Williams," Janet called over. "Is that old biddy at it again?" "Why don't you crawl back under the house?" Talia shot back. Lacking a witty enough response, Janet just sneered. As she walked into the room, Talia's heart exploded. Paler than a sheet of paper, Doris stared lifeless into the distance. Talia pulled back the hospital gown and started pounding on Doris's frail chest, screaming loud enough the entire third floor could hear. "Janet, get a doctor. Code blue. Code blue." Her eyes darted to the monitor. It was off the plug lying on the floor. "Come on, Mrs. Williams. Don't you die on me." Talia leaned down to blow into quiet lungs as Janet ran in with a defibrillator machine. Bitch or no bitch. When shit hit the fan, Janet was ready. She charged the machine while Talia pounded an artificial heartbeat into Doris's chest, performing CPR at urgent intervals. Ready, Janet shouted. Talia reached for the paddles and waited for the go-ahead. Clear. Doris's body jumped off the bed, then collapsed in a lifeless heap. Come on, Doris, Talia shouted. Ready. Almost charged. Okay, clear. Talia released the electronic pulse again, the paddles glued to Doris by extreme voltage. Again her body jerked off the bed, collapsing as the pulse released her. Plug in the monitor. Okay, as soon as clear. Janet leapt to the outlet, grabbing the plug from the floor and jamming it in. She ran back and looked at the machine. Clear. She whispered hoarsely. God damn it, you old bitch, wake up. The paddles ignited Doris a final time. The thin flat line on the monitor bounced. Talia started laughing with relief. She heard you. The two nurses grinned through maniacal chuckles as Doris Eleanor Williams opened her eyes and blinked at the ceiling. I saw a light. Talia's laughter stopped. What? Really? You saw one? Doris nodded and tears fell. Why did you bring me back? Crepe hands climbed up to cover her sobs. Doctors rushed into the room. Talia backed into the wall while they asked questions she couldn't answer as she stared at the old woman whose heart was broken. It was Janet who told the doctors what happened, glancing only once to Talia as the younger nurse left the room, staring at nothing, her steps slow. She wished Jonas was there, but he was off on Mondays. Walking to the nurse's station, she stumbled behind the counter and sat down, her eyes on the room 321. Soon she saw 4 doctors filing out, followed by Janet. The elder nurse split off from the group and headed toward her. Don't, Talia mumbled. Janet threw up her hands. I wasn't going to say anything. She sat down in a chair and pretended to futz around with paperwork. Then she turned and said, with the weight of one who doesn't want to talk but has to because it's the right thing to do, you did your job just as good as the doctors would have. You did your job in there. Don't blame yourself for doing your job. Janet was still stiff and her bun was too tight on her head, but her eyes held respect in them for once. Thank you, Janet. The normally surly nurse nodded and went back to fake working. For a long time Talia stared at room 321. Finally she couldn't stand it anymore. She rose up, compelled by a need to know. Doris lay quietly on the bed, the tears now gone. She stared at the cold ceiling. Talia walked to her bedside, pushing back the privacy curtain a little, just for something to do. There was no one sharing the room. They were alone. With her tone quiet and careful, Talia asked, why did you say that? I don't have anyone anymore, that's why. My husband left me 18 years ago. My children have moved to get as far away from me as possible. I messed up as a mother, and now they want nothing to do with me. I'm sure that's not. Her hand rose a little off the blanket. I know what I did. You want the truth or you want lies? The truth. Talia lowered her head. I'm listening. You go through life not really aware how much what you do impacts everyone. And everything. People are what are most important. People. Her eyes drifted away. I want to call it a night. Maybe there's something on the other side. Maybe I can start again. I'm sorry, but if you're on my watch I have to save you. Doris looked defeated. I unplugged that damn thing but I forgot to do it when you weren't here. You're the only one who cares. Have you ever thought of? With patience and sincerity, she picked up Doris's hand. I mean, why don't you call your children and tell them you're sorry? Doris snorted. Those ungrateful eggheads? Are you kidding? Talia frowned and gave the hand a squeeze. Mrs. Williams, if you want something you've never had, you have to do something you've never done. She laid the hand back down, patted it, and headed for the door.